Them all. Leave the radios for last so the ones still breathing have to listen. The man who said it did not raise his voice. That was the thing that would stay with the survivors longer than the noise of the guns. The flatness of it. The way he delivered a death sentence for 19 Americans in the same tone a tired man uses to tell a waiter he'll have the same as last time. He stood at the lip of the wash with his boot on the shoulder blade of a wounded specialist named Owen Tate, and he lifted 2 fingers, and somewhere above the dry riverbed, 70 rifles came up off 70 chests in a sound like a single long inhalation. Staff Sergeant Reuben Marsh had been a soldier for 14 years, and he had never once in those 14 years screamed for a sniper, because in 14 years there had always been a plan, a fallback, a vehicle, a voice on the net with an answer. There was no answer now. He pressed himself into the gravel behind a shattered Hesco barrier with blood that wasn't his drying on the back of his hand, and he turned his head and he shouted into the dust, "Anybody? Anybody here shoot? Long gun, designated marksman, anything. I don't care what your MOS says. Speak up right now." Nothing came back but the wind off the notch and the small wet sounds of men who were hurt. And then, from the corner of the position where the quiet supply clerk had spent the last 2 weeks doing exactly what she was told, and not one thing more, there was a click. Not a word. A latch. The morning had begun the way the worst ones always do, which is to say, gently. There had been no warning. Firebase Larkin sat on a saddle of high ground above a pass the maps called the Notch and the men called other things, and at 0551 the sun came up the color of a struck match over the eastern ridge, and a private from Tucson said it looked like the cover of a cheap paperback. And 4 minutes later the first mortar round walked into the motor pool and turned the private's joke into the last thing anyone remembered him saying clearly. Marsh was on the ground before the second round landed. 14 years does that. It moves the decision out of the brain, where it is slow, and into the spine, where it is fast. He didn't choose to drop. His body chose for him, the way a body chooses to flinch from a flame, and by the time his mind caught up, he was already low-crawling toward the comms tent, shouting for accountability and getting back the worst kind of answer, which is the silence of men deciding whether they are still alive. What came over the ridge behind the mortars was not a mob. Marsh understood the difference immediately, and the understanding sat in his stomach like a swallowed stone. The shapes coming down the north face of the notch moved in staggered bounds, cover to cover, one element up while another held, the spacing disciplined and even. This was not a raid by men with grudges and AKs. This was infantry, trained, drilled, patient infantry, advancing in 3 prongs against a position held by 19 soldiers who had been on a quiet line so long that half of them had started to believe quiet was the natural state of the world. Corporal Hale Beck slid in beside him with his rifle, and his eyes too wide, and did the arithmetic out loud the way frightened, smart people do. 3-1. Marsh, that's 3-1, and they've got the high side of the wash. They start working a gun across us from that outcrop, and we're done. I know what we need. We don't have it. That was true. They did not have it. Larkin's authorized strength didn't include a sniper section. The nearest precision asset was attached to a unit 40 minutes out by the relief column's most optimistic estimate, and 40 minutes against 3-1 was not a number you could survive. Marsh looked at what he did have. 2 medics, a comms sergeant with a fragment in her forearm, a vehicle crew with no vehicle, a handful of riflemen, most of them under 25, a couple of them under 21, all of them looking at him the way a congregation looks at a preacher when the building is on fire, and in the back, against the supply connex, doing nothing, drawing no attention, a woman whose name he'd had to check on a manifest a week ago because she gave him no other reason to learn it. Specialist June Ashby had come to them 14 days earlier as a lateral transfer out of a sustainment battalion, a piece of paperwork that nobody questioned because nobody questions a clerk. She was somewhere in her 30s, brown-haired, unremarkable in the specific way that takes effort to maintain. She ate alone, but not in a manner that announced she was eating alone. She cleaned weapons she was never going to fire with the same patient thoroughness she gave to counting boxes. When she was spoken to, she answered in as few words as the question allowed, and then the conversation ended, not rudely, just completely, like a door closing on a well-oiled hinge. Mars could not, in that moment, have told you a single thing about her except that she was always the last to need anything and the first to be forgotten. He shouted for a shooter because he was a drowning man, and a drowning man grabs at water. The latch he heard was the sound of Ashby pulling a hard case out from under a collapsed shelf in the connex, a case that had been logged into the property book 6 months before any of them arrived and never once signed out. Her hands moved across it the way other people's hands move across their own face in the dark. Without looking, without thinking, with a certainty that does not come from training, but from the far side of training, from the place you reach after the 10,000th repetition where the fingers stop asking the brain for permission. Inside, broken into its parts and bedded in foam, was a bolt-action rifle that did not belong to anyone who counted batteries for a living. A long, lean 338 with a suppressor as long as a man's forearm and a scope that cost more than the truck Marsh had financed back home. She began to assemble it, action into stock, barrel into action, each piece seating with a single deliberate sound, no fumble, no second try, the whole sequence running about as fast as a man can tie his shoes and a good deal more quietly. The platoon went still. Even the radio seemed to hold its breath. Marsh crossed the 10 feet between them and crouched. Ashby. She didn't look up. Sergeant. Where did that come from? Section 4 of the manifest. Emergency cash. It's been on the property book 6 months. The bolt slid home with a soft, oiled finality. Nobody ever counts the cash. And you can run it. She looked at him then, just once, and what he saw in her face rearranged something in his chest. Her eyes were not the false calm of a person performing courage. They were the actual calm of a person who had already done the math on her own death and filed the result and moved on to more useful problems. I've run one before, she said. How many times? She thought about it for a moment, and the moment told him more than any answer could have. Enough, she said, and that was all. She seated the scope, brought the rifle to a broken section of the barrier, and lay down in the gravel without anyone telling her where the line was. She found it herself. Marsh dropped beside her and pointed. Gun team. The outcrop. 200 meters, 11 o'clock. They get that working and we lose the left. I see them. Her voice had gone level and economical, a voice that didn't waste anything. Not breath, not feeling. 3. Gunner, assistant, a spotter low and right of the rock. A pause. He watched her do something behind her eyes, something quick. 6 knots, left to right. Ground's warming. I've got a Mirage band setting up around 250 in the next couple of minutes. That'll lie to me about the wind. I want this before that happens. He did not understand half of what she'd said, and he understood all of what it meant. Take it. She let her breath out slow, and her body did a thing he had only seen a few times in his life and never gotten used to. It went still. Not the held breath rigidity of a nervous man, but a settling, a draining of every small motion out of the muscles, until she was less like a person aiming and more like a fixed object that the world had agreed to leave alone. Her finger came off the guard. There was no jerk, no flinch, just a single clean exhale, and at the bottom of it the rifle spoke. The report was enormous and strange, flattened by the suppressor into a deep, heavy cough that shoved the air instead of cracking it. 200 meters away, the gun went silent before the echo finished. The net came alive in Marsh's ear. Somebody on the left flank yelling that the gun had stopped, asking if that was friendly. He keyed the handset, looking at Ashby, who had already cycled the bolt and was already scanning. That's ours, he said. Hold your line and let her work. He had not planned to put it that way. The word came out on its own, her, and it landed in the position differently than he expected, not as a diminishment, but as the single most important fact on the saddle. Beck stared at the empty outcrop, then at the woman in the gravel, and his mouth was open and nothing was coming out of it. What happened over the next half hour was the most instructive 30 minutes of Reuben Marsh's career, and he had been to schools. He had served beside good marksmen. He respected the craft. He knew, in the abstract, what it cost to put a round in a man at 600 meters and what kind of person practiced until they could. What Ashby did was a different animal, and it took him most of those 30 minutes to find the word for it, and the word when it came was not shooting, it was bookkeeping. She was keeping the enemy's books, and she was keeping the enemy's books, and she was keeping them in red. The advance came in 3 prongs, a main body pushing straight down the north face and 2 flanking elements peeling wide to fold the position in from the sides. It was a textbook envelopment, the kind of maneuver that works beautifully so long as the people being enveloped cannot reach out and put a finger on the moving parts. Ashby put her finger on the moving parts. Ashby put her finger on the moving parts. She ignored the main body, which was where every instinct said to shoot, and she took the western flank's point man first. And the instant he dropped, she swung 2 rounds east into the other flank and killed not a leader, but a man with an antenna riding above his pack. The radio man, the nervous system. Then she stopped. Both flanks froze. They did not retreat. They went to cover and lost their timing, which is worse because a man in cover is a man not advancing, and an advance that stops to think is an advance that has already begun to die. She had bought maybe 20 seconds, and she spent them on the main body. 4 rounds in something under 10, each one placed not where a man was densest, but where the formation shape depended on him, and the center of the northern push came apart at the seam, and the whole line hesitated. "She's not fighting them," Beck said, and his voice had gone soft and far away. "She's editing them. Marsh, she's reading their formation like it's a sentence, and she's crossing out words." "I can see that, Beck. Who is she?" He didn't answer because Ashby was talking, low and even, never lowering the scope. "Sergeant, that got a mortar tube coming up through the brush on your southeast tree line. Maybe 30 seconds before it's laid. If it gets registered, they bracket us in 3 rounds and we don't get a fourth." Marsh looked at the tree line and saw trees. "Can you reach it?" "It's past the angle I'd want." A small pause, the kind he was learning to read as her doing in 3 seconds what other people couldn't do in 3 minutes. "I can still hit it. How sure?" She said nothing for the length of one breath. "Sure enough." And the rifle coughed, and 100 meters back in the brush a length of steel toppled with a clatter that was not an explosion, just the sad mechanical sound of a tube hitting rock, followed by shouting in a language Marsh didn't speak and didn't need to. Private Eddie Solis, 19, from a town in the valley with one stoplight, made a sound from 5 feet away that was half a laugh and half something wetter. "She shot a mortar," he said, "to no one, to everyone. Tuh, through the trees." "Sergeant, did that eyes on your sector, Solis." But Marsh's hands were shaking, and not from fear. It was the other thing, the rare thing, the feeling of standing on the unexpected right side of an impossible problem. The feeling that pulls a 14-year man's voice down to a whisper and makes him grip his radio a little tighter because he has remembered, against all the evidence of the morning, that survival is a thing that sometimes happens. The enemy pulled back to regroup, which was a mercy with a knife in it. You don't pull back to regroup unless you intend to come back meaner. In the low, Marsh slid down beside her and let himself ask, "You're going to tell me something now." She was counting rounds, thumbing them in a small private rhythm, not looking at him. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. Start with how a sustainment clerk shoots a tube through a tree line with a rifle that's logged to a cache nobody's supposed to know exists." "The rifle's mine," she said. "I've had it 9 years. The cache paperwork was a place to keep it." She set the magazine aside, even and deliberate. "The clerk job is cover. I was between things. I asked for somewhere boring." "Cover for what?" She looked at him, and for the first time, the calm in her face had a floor he could see down through, and at the bottom of it was something old and tired. "There was a cell," she said. "Small, long-range work. Interdiction, mostly. You put 1 round into the right thing at the right time, and a thing that was going to happen doesn't. We didn't show up in after-action reports because we were never officially anywhere. The program's name was Backstop. It got folded up 4 years ago. Folded up. Programmed to get folded up." She seated around with her thumb. "What they teach you doesn't." He sat with that. Around them the wounded were being shifted. Corporal Maeve Whitfield, the senior medic, was working a thigh wound on a kid named Latimer and talking to him in the low, steady tone medics use to keep a frightened man's heart inside his chest. "Why'd you sit on it?" Marsh said. 2 weeks. You watched us run drills. You watched me. Why not tell me what I had?" She was quiet long enough that he thought she wouldn't answer. "Because the last time I trusted my own math," she said finally, "I was right and it didn't matter. And a man named Eli died because somebody above me decided his read of a clock was worth more than mine. He didn't say anything." "You don't to that." "We were tracking a movement," she went on, and her voice flattened out into something that wasn't cold so much as carefully refrigerated. "A convoy. I had the firing solution. I had the window. It was 30 seconds wide, and I'd built it 3 times in my head, and it held all 3 times. The order was hold, confirm hire. By the time hire confirmed, the window was gone, the convoy was gone, and 4 days later, the thing that convoy was carrying did what it was always going to do, and Eli was close enough to it that there wasn't much to send home. She racked the bolt. I was the asset. The asset doesn't get to be right. The asset gets to be deployed, like a flare or a smoke grenade. And then somebody who's never lain in the dirt for 9 hours decides whether your number is real. A beat. So when they offered me boring, I took boring. I wanted to do a job where I could see exactly what I'd done at the end of the day. This many boxes. This many sheets filed. Nothing I had to defend to a man with a clipboard who outranked me and outweighed me and didn't know wind from weather. And instead, Marsh said, you ended up here. And instead, I ended up here. He looked at her for a while. I'm glad you did, he said. She didn't answer that either, but something in the set of her shoulders eased a fraction, and he took it for what it was. What he didn't tell her, what he only worked out later in the cold weeks after, was that he had watched a thing happen to his platoon in that lull, an invisible thing he'd seen happen before only around veteran NCOs and the occasional officer who was the genuine article. The men had begun to orient. Solace had shifted his position, without being told, to a spot that covered Ashby's firing lane. 2 others had drifted into a loose arc around her, a bubble of mutual cover nobody had ordered. When she needed rounds relayed up from the cache, 4 hands reached at once. They had found, in the middle of the worst morning of their lives, a center, and the center was a woman who hadn't strung 30 words together in 2 weeks. The second push came harder. They always do. The flanks were better synchronized this time, the main body moving under suppressing fire that kept sabers' heads down, and at the edges of it now were 2 light armored vehicles, slab-sided and ugly, grinding up the wash to add their guns to the math. That's an APC, Marsh, Beck said. She can't crack an APC at this angle. Not with that. I know. So what do we? Marsh didn't answer, because Ashby had already moved. The rifle was tracking past the vehicles, past the infantry, up and back, climbing the slope to a rocky shelf 270 meters out, where a single figure crouched with a radio and a pair of optics. The man directing the armor, the one synchronizing the timing, calling the next adjustment, the conductor of the whole patient envelopment. Marsh put his binoculars on him and understood, if that man kept working, the vehicles would be in a firing position in 4 minutes, and the firebase would stop existing. She didn't shoot the man. She shot his antenna, a folding wand of metal no thicker than a pencil, and snapped it off clean at 270 meters in a crosswind, and the man dropped flat, alive, and suddenly deaf. The vehicle slowed at once, their drivers receiving no guidance, the momentum bleeding out of the push and pooling into confusion. 40 seconds, Ashby said quietly. They'll have a backup net up in 40 seconds. That's enough time to move your left. Marsh was already keying the handset. His men moved. Beck was staring at her like she was a thing that had walked out of scripture. She shot the antenna, he said. Not the man. The antenna. Get to the secondary line, Beck. The second push broke at 0709, and it cost them. They lost Private First Class Owen Tate, 21. From a town in Idaho with a good high school football team he'd never stopped talking about. He took something low in the second wave, and Whitfield worked on him for 11 minutes in the gravel. And at the end of the 11 minutes, she sat back on her heels with her hands red to the wrist and didn't say anything because there was nothing to say. 18 of 19. Marsh felt the number register the way you feel a burn. Not when it happens, but a second after, when the nerve catches up. He filed Owen Tate's name in the place where a long-serving man keeps such names, the place nobody talks about, and made himself come back to the living. He found Ashby reloading with that focused economy that had stopped frightening him and started, somewhere in the last hour, to steady him instead. Hart, Ashby, he said, catching himself. You all right? The questions seemed to surprise her, the way an unexpected kindness surprises a person braced for an instruction. Yes, the real answer or the operator answer. A pause, longer than her usual. My left shoulder's been compensating since round 40. Old strain. It's manageable. How manageable? Enough. There was that word again, and he understood it now. as her way of saying as much as it has to be, and I won't tell you different. When this is over, he said, you and I are going to have a long conversation. She looked at him steadily. When this is over, she said, I'd like that. And the quietness of it told him she wasn't agreeing to a debrief. She was agreeing to something that cost more than any round she'd fired all morning. Then the net cracked, and a new voice came up. Saber 6, this is Talon. We have eyes on Larkin. Say status. Marsh grabbed the handset. Talon, Saber 6, we are holding. 18 packs. Position contested. Enemy withdrawn to the wash. Assessing for a third push. How far? 40 mics, Saber. Longer if they contest the approach. 40 mics, Saber. Longer if they contest the approach. 40 minutes. Beck heard it and his face did something. They'll hit us again before Talon's in range. I know. And Marsh's eyes went, against his will, to the high point of the saddle, to the old fire lookout that crowned the position. A steel mast and a small railed platform that the original builders of Larkin had inherited from some long-dead ranger district and never torn down. Half of it had been chewed off in the morning's barrage, the southern ladder gone, the platform skeletal. But the top still stood, and from the top a person could see the whole length of the notch and the wash beyond, every approach, every fold of ground. A person up there could call the third push before it formed and walk Talon's guns onto the enemy before they crossed the line of departure. A person up there would also be alone, exposed on every side, silhouetted against the sky, the easiest target on the saddle for any counter-sniper the third wave brought along. He looked at Ashby. She was already looking at the mast. No, he said. She turned to him. You're not sending me anywhere, she said. Not sharply, just as a correction of fact. I'm telling you that platform gives me 400 meters of clean sight line in every direction, and I can hold every approach into the notch from it. And right now, that is the only way 18 of us are 19 tomorrow. A beat, and her voice dropped under the wind into the register that was almost private, the one where the narrator of her own life would have called her June. I've spent 4 years being careful with myself because the last time I wasn't, somebody told me my math didn't count. I'm done waiting for the man with the clipboard. He held her eyes for a long moment. Then he said the only thing left to say, which was, then I'm putting 2 of my best on that ladder to keep you fed and covered, and you don't argue. I won't argue. She went up the broken mast with the rifle slung across her back, climbing the half that remained hand over hand where the ladder was gone, and Salas and Beck wedged themselves into the rubble at the base, with extra magazines and their own rifles pointed outward, and the platoon arranged itself below her without an order, a body protecting its own center. The third push came at 0731, and it was meant to be the last one, theirs or hers. The main body came hard under real suppression now, and the 2 armored vehicles came with it, and behind the vehicles, riding in the second rank where a careful man rides, came a figure Marsh's binoculars found and held, a man in plain dress with no insignia at all, standing in the back of a light command truck with a handset to his ear, his other hand making small flat gestures, conducting. On the platform, 400 feet of clear air around her and the whole valley laid out like a problem on a chalkboard. June Ashby went still. She heard the man's gestures before she saw them, in the sense that mattered. She'd been reading the shape of this enemy for 2 hours, and she knew the rhythm of it now, the patient folding, the layered timing, the doctrine. She had seen this doctrine before. She had seen it on a printout 4 years ago, in a briefing room, attached to a movement she'd had a 30-second window on and been told to hold, the same envelopment, the same conductor's hand. She did not know if it was literally the same man, and it did not matter. It was the same idea, the idea that had killed Eli while she lay in the dirt, with the solution already built and waited on a clock that belonged to someone else. This time there was no one above her on the clock. The command truck was at 85 meters, quartering left, moving at a walking pace across her front. She built the solution the way she'd built 10,000 others, except that this one she'd been building, in a sense, for 4 years. Wind fading now to 4 knots as the morning heat flattened it. Drop. The slow lateral lead of a moving vehicle. The cant of the platform under her, which she absorbed into the math instead of fighting. She did not hurry. The whole world narrowed to a single point at the end of the barrel, and the point held the truck, and the truck held a man with no name who thought he could not be reached. She squeezed. The rifle coughed, and the round took the better part of a second to cross 580 meters. And at the end of that second, the command truck's engine block let go in a gout of steam, and the truck slewed sideways and stopped, and the man with no insignia went down behind the bed of it. Alive or not, she didn't care, because the thing she'd killed was not the man. The thing she'd killed was the timing. Without the conductor, the prongs lost their seam. The armor, getting no fresh guidance, ground to a halt and sat there steaming and blind. And into that hole Marsh poured everything Larkin had left while Ashby walked Talon's inbound guns onto the stalled formation with 3 calm corrections over the net, and the third push did not break so much as evaporate. The way a thing evaporates when the idea holding it together has been shot out from under it. The relief column crossed the line at 0814. The enemy was gone from the wash by then, dragging what they could, leaving what they couldn't. 18 of Saber's 19 walked or were carried off that saddle, and the one who didn't was Owen Tate, and Marsh would carry that one the way he carried the others, in the quiet place for the rest of his life. They found Ashby still on the platform when it was over, the rifle broken back down into its case, her left arm held a little close to her body. She came down the broken mast slow, and at the bottom, Salas reached up without thinking and steadied her last step, and she let him, which Marsh thought was its own kind of report. The long conversation he'd promised her never happened, not the way either of them had imagined. By the time the dust at Larkin settled, there was a vehicle at the gate and a man beside it who wore no insignia of his own, the friendly kind this time, the kind that comes to collect a thing the army has remembered it owns. They wanted her back. Of course they did. A clerk who could keep the enemy's books and read was not a thing a country left filing manifests. But she did something with the offer that the man at the gate had clearly not expected, and that Marsh only heard about secondhand later. From a young soldier named Daniel Wells, who'd been a brand new private at Larkin, and had spent the morning of the third push lying flat behind a Connex, believing with his whole body that he was going to die there. Will said that before she left, she pulled him aside and a couple of the other young ones, and she'd spent an hour with them on a tailgate not teaching them to shoot. There wasn't time for that, and it wasn't the point, but teaching them to see, teaching them what it looks like when a line is about to hesitate, what a formation tells you a half second before it commits, how to find the one moving part that, if you touched it, made all the other parts stop. She told them the work was not the round was the easy part. The work was knowing which thing to spend the round on, and being willing to be right out loud, where someone could hear you, where it could cost you. She told them the hardest shot she'd ever taken was not the truck at 580 meters. The hardest shot she'd ever taken was the latch on a case in the back corner of a position where she'd spent 2 weeks teaching everyone to forget she existed. The decision, after 4 years of being careful, to stop being invisible and let it count. Then she got in the vehicle. Marsh was at the gate when it pulled out, and he didn't wave because a wave was the wrong gesture for it. He raised one hand, flat, the way you raise a hand to a person who knows what it means. I see you. I know what this was. Go. She raised hers back. The vehicle moved through the gate and onto the open road, and the morning stretched out ahead of it without softness or guarantee, the way mornings do when they matter. In the seat beside her, the case rode quiet and familiar. The parts inside settled in their foam where her hands could find them in the dark. She was already reading the next thing, the briefing they'd handed her at the gate, reading it twice the way she read everything. Twice, once for what it said, and once for what it meant. Somewhere in it was a movement, and a window and a clock, and this time she understood now. The clock was hers, and she would not wait on it for anyone, and Eli would have liked that. And Owen Tate's name was already in the place where she kept such names. And she was carrying all of it down the open road in the particular stillness that no one had taught her. And that she had spent half her life learning was not the absence of feeling at all, but the whole weight of it, held steady in 2 hands that knew their work.